Welcome to Oh God What Now? I'm Jacob Jarvis. And on today's show, as Parliament returns, we discuss Keir Starmer's priorities and whether he will care very much about the assorted backlash he is facing at the moment. And joining us, we have Tim Roca, the Labour MP for Macclesfield. We'll ask him how he's found being an MP so far and what he's hoping to achieve. Before we start, though, a reminder about 2 live shows this autumn. If you're in Liverpool for Labour Conference, or simply because you live there, we have a second show at the Laughter House Comedy Club on Tuesday, 24th of September. To follow up our sold-out show on the Monday. It's a completely different panel. This time, Zoe Grünewald, Rob Hutton of The Critic and the Paper Cuts podcast, and Politics Joe's Ava Santina will be joining Andrew Harrison for a quality night of political talk. And we'll be in Hove on Wednesday, 9th of October at the Old Market Theatre, where Dorian Lynskey will be joined by Ros Taylor, Raf Behr, and very special guest Jan Ravens. Links to tickets for both shows are at the top of the show notes, and Patreon people get a discount, of course. We'll see you there. Okay, let's meet the panel. First up, it's Guardian columnist and lead writer plus author of Politics, A Survivor's Guide, Raf Behr. Hi, Raf.
Hi there.
Raf, there is some depressing news from Germany after the far-right AfD won a state election for the first time. This is obviously a bad thing, but just how significant is it? It's the kind of never-ending media narrative of the far-right sweeping Europe. Sometimes can make it a little bit hard to tell.
Well, yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, obviously it feels particularly poignant, maybe that's too soft a word, in Germany because of all the countries in Europe where you might hope there was a really powerful inoculation against voting for the far right. It would be Germany, which has actually confronted and recognised and dealt with its Third Reich past, I think, incredibly well from a cultural point of view. It's always a bit dangerous doing the read across to various different jurisdictions. I mean, obviously, Marine Le Pen did very well in French elections, the National Front there. You do have the far right challenging the status quo or established parties in many countries, but each time it has a slightly different flavour. I would say what's actually particularly worrying in the sort of short term from the German result is it's not just the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland, but actually a populist left party, the alliance of Sarah Wagenknecht, who was a member of the former East German Communist Party, has also done pretty well. And what's interesting about her proposition and the link up with the AfD is they are both quite skeptical about very skeptical about German support for Ukraine, tilt a little bit towards Russia. And so from a foreign policy point of view and pressure on a very weak German coalition to change the line with regard to the war in Ukraine, that feels like something that is actually in the immediate term is going to be quite destabilizing.
So essentially it's worrying but complicated is the short take.
As always.
Next up, we've got the Leeds Westminster editor and self-described very serious political journalist, Zoe Grünewald. Hi, Zoe.
Hello.
Zoe, there are massive protests in Israel at the moment. You explained these a bit in our sibling podcast, Paper Cuts, on Monday morning. What's the latest and what is the resolution that the protesters and the strikers actually want?
Yeah, so one of Israel's most powerful unions announced a one-day strike in order to put pressure on the government to bring back the remaining Israeli hostages held by Hamas. Obviously, this comes after the death of 6 hostages over the weekend. There is increasing pressure on Netanyahu to broker a ceasefire deal. It was a one-day strike. It's over. There was a court ruling that people had to go back to work, which didn't really matter because it was a one-day strike anyway, and the protest is still ongoing. The big question is what happens now? It feels like the tide is really turning against Netanyahu, both internationally but also domestically. We know for a long time that the hostage families, or many of them, haven't actually backed Netanyahu's call to block a ceasefire. They actually feel like the decision not to broker a ceasefire is putting the hostages in more danger. And Netanyahu has tempered his wording. So it's about, it's emphasis on destroying Hamas and achieving total victory rather than just bringing the hostages home. But, public polling in Israel shows that there is huge support for a ceasefire and bringing an end to this part of the conflict. But the problem is Netanyahu is beholden to some of his cabinet colleagues on the right. And there is now a break. The defense minister has come out. He enjoys some opposition support. He's asked Netanyahu to move towards a ceasefire. We know the unions are turning against him and the protests are ongoing. So I think what really matters is this week, what happens. The hostage families are calling for independent strikes. We could see those ongoing, more and more protests. But, for Netanyahu, it's politically very difficult because of the pressure within his own government.
And our guest today is Labour's first MP for Macclesfield for over a century, Tim Roca. Hi, Tim.
Good afternoon.
Tim, there has been a bit of criticism around Labour's messaging that it's a bit sort of doom and gloom. But you're new to this job. You must be excited about it. So tell me a little bit, what gives you reason for hope as you take on the role of MP for Macclesfield?
Well, come on, we've been in opposition for over 14 years. The chance to get our hands on the levers of government, put our values into action, actually turn the country around is an opportunity you don't want to miss. I think you're right. There's a spring in the step of Labour MPs. We sort of came straight back after the election into Parliament, into Hogwarts, as some people call it, trying to learn where things were and how things worked, recruiting teams. And now the proper parliamentary session feels like it started. We've got Great British Railways coming up this week. I think the bill on Thursday in terms of nationalising the railways, or beginning that process at least. And we've got a big agenda which was set out in the King's speech. So yes, the government is rightly pointing out that the inheritance is incredibly poor from the previous Conservative government, but Labour backbenchers are excited to get stuck in and start to deliver on the programme we promised.
I won't ask you what Hogwarts house you'd be in, but we are going to talk briefly about the Slytherin, I suppose, in terms of the Tories. On a separate note, there have been some rumblings from the Tory leadership contest. Raf, Kemi Badenoch has come out and she's made these comments around suggesting that she is the most realistic prospect for them, and has criticised some of her colleagues for not kind of taking the issue of immigration seriously or realistically. What do you make to her narrative that she's trying to put across and her chances generally?
Well, first of all, in terms of what they describe, what the Conservative Party considers to be a realistic conversation about immigration, it's actually very hard to know what the parameters of that even are. So what does she mean? Does she mean insufficiently serious as in sort of not sufficiently draconian and hard line? It's my sense is more broadly that all of the candidates are conducting this contest within the idiom of recent Conservative leadership contests, where the structure of it meant that the winner automatically gets to become Prime Minister. They're in government, so this is how Liz Truss became Prime Minister, how Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister. They didn't have to go through the tedious, annoying business of winning a general election. You just got the fast track by winning the Tory leadership. And that's the style of the whole contest. So, Kemi Badenoch, she also, not just, was it a couple of days ago, was saying that she wasn't afraid of Doctor Who. And I had to remember, first of all, I thought, what does that even mean? What are you talking about? And I remembered because David Tennant had criticised her about something and he once played. I mean, it's, and so, and now today she's the realistic candidate. But the day before yesterday, she was the anti-Doctor Who candidate. James, inappropriately named, cleverly, having momentarily been the serious candidate, was today, or at least recently, saying that he would revive the Rwanda deal. I think, and he said, if I become Prime Minister, they haven't learned the grammar and the vocabulary of opposition and defeat. I think the whole party and the whole contest, to me, reeks of a fundamental denial about what it is they're going to have to do over the next 4 or 5 years. And as a result, I mean, in a way, it's a tremendous gift, because I honestly feel I don't particularly have to listen now. And I say that from a professional point of view, it spares me the hassle of actually having to pay attention at least for the next couple of months.
Well, Zoe, I'm reeling from the news that David Tennant isn't really Doctor Who, but we'll park that. Do you think it feels like it's worth paying attention to? That feels like a very strange question to ask, whether the leadership contest of one of the major political parties of our country is worth paying much attention to. But again, at the moment, as Raf says, it's just so inward-looking, and they don't seem to have had any variety of reckoning with the situation they find themselves in.
No, I mean, it's psychodrama, and it is what absolutely characterised the last 4 or 5 years of politics, at a time when really what should have been done was proper policy making. And that is, partly why some of Starmer's argument about having to make all these difficult decisions now is so convincing, because everybody is aware that there was so much navel gazing going on at the expense of actually governing. This whoever wins is going to be leader of the opposition. And as much as you might dislike the Tories, and I think I'm in good company on this podcast when I suggest that I dislike the Tories, any opposition party has an important role in holding the government to account. So you do want the leader of the opposition, even if you don't fundamentally agree with them, to be good at their job and to scrutinise government policy and to lead a party that does that. But I think Raf's right. Their focus is all wrong. What they should be looking at is how they bring the party back together. In much the same way as post-2019, Labour, were talking about how they could turn the party around and make it governable. You'd be expecting the Tories to have the same conversation. And it seems like it's just more continuity. It's just, more of the same. And the same didn't work.
Tim, how are you feeling watching the contest? And is there a level of, I suppose, that disappointment that you would kind of want a functioning opposition to some extent? And I'm sure that also MPs such as yourself would like to be able to look across the Tories and think that there have been people you could work with and there'd been a functioning cross-party side of it. And it doesn't really look very much like that's the case at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're mature and sensible and want the public good to take priority, of course we want a decent opposition. I'm afraid there's just no sign of that now. What people have said is quite right. The leadership contest so far seems very introspective. They're not reflecting on the reason they're in the situation that they're in. It's been a bit like watching, the traitors being in Parliament in July and today, because you're seeing people in corners whispering, plotting, etc. But it's a leadership contest. You have to show leadership, and none of them are doing that by starting off the discussion as to why they got to the place they're in now.
Parliament returns this week, the kids are back at school, and it's time to get serious as summer comes to a close. Keir Starmer has promised us a serious government, so there's plenty of work to do, and there are a few fires to put out as he faces a mini backlash, I'll say, over a proposed beer garden cigarette ban, and wider questions then over cuts and taxes and the financial state of the country. Raf, as Parliament returns, kind of what do you make of the vibes around it? And also, is it strange that we think so much about a government's consideration of those? Is there almost something hopeful in a way that it does seem like the government they're charting a plan, and that plan will be the plan regardless of these peaks and troughs of public opinion and Keir Starmer's personal popularity and so on?
Well, to pick up that last point first, I do think it's incredibly important to remember how early this is in the process. I mean, it's sort of self-evident, but it's a couple of months. One of those months is August, but I mean, partly because there were riots, and that was a very, very big news event. We didn't get the complete lull of news in the summer.
It feels like a much longer period. It feels like a very long recess, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, and also, ultimately, at every government, there's a little bit of crunching of gears at the beginning. Everyone's learning the processes. I think there have been some tiny missteps that, in the overall scheme of things, really won't be relevant. And there's been a lot of chat and fuss and argument about the Whitehall appointments and whether that could have been done better. We could get into the fussy weeds of whether the presentation of it was right, whether the process was exactly right. I absolutely guarantee you that is the tiniest footnote in the story of this Labour government, whatever happens. And where I think it's more significant, the thing to focus on is if you look at particularly the pushback on the means testing winter fuel. That's relevant because it's about the big fiscal picture, and there's a much broader structural choice that Rachel Reeves has to make, which is essentially, are you going to try and rebuild the tax base so you can fund public services by doing a few very big things, which is difficult because you've ruled out raising national insurance, income tax, those sorts of things? Or are you going to have to scrape that money by doing lots of little things? And the problem with lots of little things is you have to do a lot of them, and then you piss off quite a lot of little groups of people one at a time, and it all ends up, adding up, but you have to do little U-turns here and then, and suddenly it all looks very messy. So that is significant because it points to something that's just going to keep happening. The other stuff, vibes, and it'll change. Yeah, and I think the test of whether Keir Starmer can sort of soar above that and rise above it and keep his eyes on the longer term prize, that's intimately connected with the fiscal policy challenge, and all the rest kind of feels like froth to me.
So what specifically are you looking out for in terms of policy now Parliament is back? But then also, where are you expecting to see any sort of clashes or points of contention where you're hearing that sort of thing from people you're speaking to?
So I think just having any policy will feel like, a marked improvement on the last couple of years. But I think, Labour has said it really wants to hit the ground running. So ministers are already promising the most packed legislative agenda in decades. They want to deliver these wide-sweeping changes to the housing market and planning reform, the energy market, Great British Energy, nationalising the railways, all these things that are really big, and they want to do pretty quickly because it it underpins Labour's growth agenda. Raf's completely right, which is that the big sort of overarching theme is what is the economic plan and what are we going to hear in the October statement, in the autumn budget. And I think that is going to occupy the news agenda and the political agenda from now until then. Already, I was watching Politics Live earlier and we were already talking about the budget. It feels like speculation gets earlier and earlier every time, but I think that is to do with the fact that it is a particularly bleak economic picture and has been for the last couple of years. So I think there's going to be lots of conversations about the budget and finances. I expect the winter fuel allowance debate to rumble on. There was a suggestion I heard that there could be some slight tweaking to the system. So anyone who kind of, wasn't in receipt of pension credit and would fall under the threshold there might be some concessions made there. I'm not really sure how that would work in practice. For me specifically, I would like to see movement on the New Deal for workers and not watering down those policies, because I think that is something that Labour can implement that will make a material change to people's lives. And, like when the minimum wage came in the late 90s, that's something we now point to and say that was a really good thing for workers. And I think if Labour stands for anything, it stands for workers. So in terms of clashes, I think it's going to be the big question on the left of the Labour Party and in the middle of the Labour Party, which is, as Raf was saying, tax tweaks, or do we want to look at big kind of different ways of organising the economy? And I think, across Parliament, there's still going to be the rumbling debates over immigration, small boats, NHS waiting lists, things like that Labour are going to get attacked on because they're in government and they're difficult problems to solve.
On the speculation side of things, you mentioned there it feels like it's getting earlier and earlier. Do you think there's maybe a bit of to Raf's point, that there's been the riots over the recess and that has kind of made it feel like a lot has been happening in a time where there might not be? Is there a bit of confluence of that's happened, so that feels like Labour have been in power for longer than they have been? And then also, we're still getting used to politics being done in a different way, but the news environment not necessarily being quite used to that. Does that feel like there's this very sped up news cycle where everything is about flashpoints? Maybe we're not actually going to have everything be about flashpoints anymore, and we're all struggling to get used to that.
Yeah, I think what you have is, a newspaper media ecosystem that was always going to be pretty critical of Labour quite quickly. So there's a lot of that going on. The economic questions are difficult. There's always the immigration issue, which is rumbling along, and it defined the last election, and that, is going to be an issue for Labour. So you're getting a lot of that from the right as well. But yeah, absolutely. I think, the riots took up a lot of energy and time at a period which we thought would be quite quiet. And now the focus is very much on the economic picture. And, in some ways, there are going to be a lot of media commentators that are going to be absolutely loving and lapping it up because it's, it's content and it's news, that it is going to be a series of difficult decisions for the Labour Party. So, and I think you're right as well, like we are just seeing more policy at once than we saw before. So there's more things to pick apart.
I would also add to that just very quickly that the whole style and what has been effective as political commentary for the last few years has been driven by access to and the capacity to decrypt what's been going on inside the Conservative Party, quite separate to policy that you didn't really have to take all that seriously. You didn't have to argue about whether or not the Rwanda plan would work one way or another. It just wasn't going to work. So that was a totally different set of arguments. And a lot of those people, a lot of people who've enjoyed that game, they don't have access to the inside of the Labour Party. They're not in the loop. Their old contacts are useless, and they're not really used to playing this sort of slightly. It's not even a game anymore. They're used to playing a game. Now this is actually serious government, and the decisions and the style of it are different. And I think that culture clash and that adjustment is manifesting itself also in the reporting.
I have noticed that a lot of the Telegraph and the Times is front page articles bashing Labour has been industry experts. They are now going to their industry books rather than their political context because we know discipline in the Labour Party is pretty tight. So yeah, it's interesting what Raf said.
Well, Tim, on the kind of message discipline in the Labour Party, does it feel like in some of these things, so the cigarette ban, for example, which it remains unclear whether it's definitely going to happen or what, is sort of quite speculative, but the newspapers are having the debate about this before any of the context has come, sort of thing. Do you feel like there are some things which are gotcha questions for you almost before there's been any chance to explain it? I mean, we've heard no reasoning around the smoking ban other than it's going to happen and some people are quite annoyed by it.
We've not seen the details of what might be proposed, and it did come about in the recess. So no, that detail hasn't been put in front of MPs. It's been trailed in a way that probably isn't ideal for the government. But interestingly, when it did come out, the polling was quite clear that actually it had a degree of popularity with the public. But we'll have to see the details of it. But I'm absolutely taken with the point that there is this ecosystem in terms of the media and the news media that is adapting to the fact that two things are happening. One is there's a new government that they're probably not as well connected with as they were before. I was reading the papers over the weekend and it said Labour MPs are worried about X or Labour MPs are worried about Y. I didn't realise I was meant to be worried about that. And then there's definitely a case of this is going to be a really hard slog as a new government. Fixing the foundations, those things take a long time. It's a very deliberate slogan. And will the 24-hour news cycle adapt to the fact that it's going to be quite boring? We're going to have to do some things that are difficult, which we're hearing about already. And it's also going to take a period of time. So maybe the ecosystem will adapt and understand that.
On this sort of suggestion that there is a somewhat fractious section of the backbenches, I mean, is that your sense so far of the feeling towards it whatsoever? And what are your kind of feelings around the Commons and the way that you're interacting with your fellow colleagues?
No. I mean, again, not to be incredibly boring, you've got 400 Labour MPs, half of them are brand new. What they've been focused on, which will disappoint people perhaps, is they've been getting the basics about getting their offices sorted, getting their caseworkers recruited and employed, answering the hundreds of emails and letters that have been coming through over the summer, trying to catch a break if they can after a general election campaign. And, when we arrived on that Monday after the general election, the feeling was incredibly buoyant after 14 years. And then very quickly, people were running around trying to get things set up, working really, really hard on behalf of their constituents. August has been the same, and now they're coming back. It does feel like the new school term. People want to excel. And the atmosphere, I think, amongst Labour backbenchers is really positive.
Raf, on the things that people are pushing back on, for example, the smoking ban and stuff like that, do we sometimes as well underestimate maybe how adaptable people become? There's a suggestion there would be a massive backlash to it, but I was quite young at the time of smoking in pubs being banned. And again, it felt like that was going to be an end of days moment. And it wasn't exactly. Might people get more used to these things in practice than it's maybe been hinted at so far?
Well, certainly when it comes to changing the norms on smoking, I think you're absolutely right. It happened very quickly. And it was actually the same. I'm actually old enough to remember when the law changed to enforce wearing seatbelts in the back of cars. And there were great libertarian howls and moans about that. And then, as soon as it became clear that what you're actually arguing for is your inalienable right to be killed in a car accident as opposed to not, you think, well, that's not really good. That's not that sustainable as a political proposition. The polling on this suggests it's not. It would be fine. I do, having said that, think the Labour needs to be a little bit careful about the minority that do feel strongly about this, and it's not just overzealous ideological libertarians. I would say this because one of the things about the introduction of the smoking ban, it did really linger in the minds of a certain group of people who are quite cynical, skeptical about politics, hostile particularly to the Labour Party, who think there's a kind of bossy, arrogant, smug, pushy side to Labour politics. And it came up a lot. Bluntly speaking, in slightly older voters who, when I first encountered this, they were looking at UKIP, they voted for Brexit, they're now quite reform. And I do think that feeling that there's some know-it-all, do-goods, sort of lefty lawyers, as the woke, anti-woke sort of jargon would phrase it, you could an image you can project quite easily onto Keir Starmer, Islington MP, that cultural apparatus can generate suspicion with a certain section of voters that it's not particularly good if you really push them too hard and alienate them. And you have to be careful, at least around the messaging and the language of this sort of thing.
We've spoke about the media system changing in the more modern sense of that, but I suppose does that, allow me to get my pop psychologist head on for a moment, but play into that also the politics of nostalgia? And maybe whilst people aren't feeling particularly good about things, something like this is something that can be quite significant in people going, well, things were better back when we could do
Well, yeah,
X, Y, Z.
and you have to be careful with this, because I remember very clearly, actually, one conversation I had in an election where I was sort of vox popping someone and under Labour government, and they said, they hated the Labour government, and the things they listed in order were a smoking ban. You can't smoke in a pub anymore, but then also you're not allowed to smack your children, and you're not allowed to wear an England shirt on the bus. Now, first of all, hitting children has always been against the law, if you do it hard enough, but certainly the law was strengthened by the last Labour government. And you can wear an England shirt on the bus. You still can. So that, you don't want to be overly indulgent of a cultural apparatus that is essentially made out of slightly paranoid, nostalgic mythology. But at the same time, does the Keir Starmer government really want to early on animate a sense of itself as being part of a bossy, pushy, smug Remainer elite? I'm not sure. I mean, the reason I say is actually, although I'm very much in favour of public health interventions and I despise smoking, and I used to do it a lot and it nearly killed me, I do have a certain libertarian streak that makes me think people should also be allowed to do things that are bad for them if it's not really immediately harming someone else. So I'm a little bit on that particular, on the outdoors smoking thing. That you can animate my libertarian streak on that particular issue.
Zoe, you recently wrote about some potential quick wins for Starmer and for the government. What were they?
So, I mean, quick is doing a bit of heavy lifting there. I know it was in the copy of the text
you
as well.
You don't write the headline.
Yeah, no, I don't write the headline. No, they're not exactly quick, but I think they're important wins. They're almost sort of the milestones that I think would be quite important for the Labour government to achieve that decade in power, that decade of renewal that Starmer wants. So I think in order to, if you're telling the public that it's going to take a decade to achieve turnaround, you need to keep them with you, and you need to set kind of measurable successes. So they feel like the path to victory is slow, but you are on it. And I think one of the key things that Starmer really needs to do, and I think while I agree with Rath's point earlier on in the podcast that these little sort of scandals that we've heard about over summer, for example, the appointments and the suggestions of the donor getting the pass to number 10, while I agree that I don't think they're going to rumble on, I think Labour really need to think about how it restores public trust. Because I think, especially if you are Keir Starmer and you are quite nanny statist, and one of your big ideas for dealing with the NHS is to take a preventative approach to public health, you need people to trust you. And I think trying to restore some of that trust that was eroded over the last decade is really important. So I think just being really, really sharp on even those little scandals and really stamping them out, and really, like, for example, the Labour MP who is a landlord with lots of mouldy properties. I think that's exactly the sort of thing that Labour needs to be really clear is unacceptable. So restoring public trust, not a quick win, but important. Planning reform, that is something that Labour has absolutely, put its flag in the ground on. It simply has to be done to prove that, it's the basis of their green shoots for recovery. It's the basis of growth, building. Once you get planning reform through and people hear about developments being made and plans for new things to be built, I think that can, that's something you can evidence as proof that your plan is working. The New Deal for Workers, again, I think is one of those things that it can just make people's lives a bit sort of materially better. People who are on insecure contracts or don't have rights from day one, or, all those things, just knowing that Labour is working for the worker, I think is really important. And finally, if Labour can really try and bring down those NHS waiting lists, I think that would be really important, because that was something that Sunak really failed to do. And it was always shoved at him again and again. Those 5 pledges, he didn't achieve them. They really stuck in the public's mind. And the NHS is very important to people. So I would say those 4 things, if I were, in Labour, I would be wanting to achieve those as much as I can in the next 10 years.
Tim, on the sort of scandals there that Zoe mentioned, look, politics isn't fair, much as life's not fair. And I know there's very much going to be an argument to say, look at what the Tories did and look at the raft of built-up scandals they had. But do you, would you take the point or feel the responsibility that now, as a Labour government saying that things have totally changed and having pointed those out, there is some level that the public is going to expect the government to be sort of cleaner than clean, and sort of completely, there can be none of these sort of things. There has to be an almost zero tolerance policy, and it will be one aspect that pointing back and saying, well, the Tories, it won't work there.
Yeah, I completely agree. And Keir's already set out how he expects the highest standards from his MPs and from his ministers, and I think he himself has set an example as well. But trust is earned, and as far as the public are concerned, I think that they will begin to trust the government as we start to deliver, and that's going to take time. So I think we've got to ride out some of the difficulties that will come in the first year to 2 years, and as people start to see basic public services deliver what they want them to deliver, as they start to see waiting lists fall, as they start to see living standards increase again, that trust in the government will grow. But, there is no getting away from the fact with a large majority and a very difficult situation that's been inherited, there's a bit of an obligation to do very difficult things at the start and trust that the public will eventually repay you by seeing in your delivery that you've done the right thing. And I think, the start has been really positive. We saw Wes Streeting with the doctors and with the pay deals that came along, a sort of conciliatory approach to public sector workers, which I think is really important. And as much as the right wing press would like to paint it, it was about giving people a fair deal after year upon year of real terms cuts to their income. So I think that's really positive. And people have said it before. I'll get in trouble for saying this about Keir. I think it's about delivering a slightly boring government. By being competent and getting stuff done, and not the gimmicks that we saw from the Conservatives in the previous term.
I know there's the sense of shifting away from maybe the politicking of the past that we saw there, and I hear you on the pragmatic side of it. But is there maybe a slightly as well, I don't know, political stance to it as well, that if there is any time for being unpopular, it's now as well?
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. It makes total political sense to do the difficult things now, but it's also the responsible thing to do when you have a majority the size that you have, as we do in a Labour government. So we've got to do it now, and the faster that we do the difficult things, the faster we'll earn and reap the reward as a country in the long run. But that also doesn't mean being heartless or not listening to people, and I think that's one of the things we've got to make sure that we do, whether it's reforming the planning system or talking about preventative measures, to help public health. We've also got to make sure that we're listening and consulting properly. And that balance will be really difficult. And at times we'll probably get it wrong. But as long as people see us making the effort, then I think that's the right thing.
Next up then, it's time to choose our hero and villain of the week. This is where I ask each of the panellists for a hero and villain, and then I, out of nowhere, basically make a decision, to be honest. So, Raf, first to you, who's your hero? And then let's go villain after that.
I'm going to be quite boring, quite front bench, conventional politics here. So my hero is, I'm going to go for Bridget Phillipson. I don't know, I almost said shadow education secretary there. It does take a while to change gear, doesn't it? She's not the shadow, she's literally the Secretary of State for Education, and who has scrapped the single word Ofsted judgment categorised. So there's still going to be Ofsted inspections, there's still going to be reports, still going to be scorecards, schools are still going to be judged and held to account for the service that they provide, but it's not going to be reduced to a single word, which teachers hate, and parents hate, and everyone who's had children go through the school system knows it's just the most perverse, warping lens through which to apply an incredibly complicated judgment about a service provision. So, yeah, yay, Bridget Phillipson for... I mean, it was a manifesto commitment, so yay, Bridget Phillipson for fulfilling a manifesto commitment and getting it done.
And then your villain.
Yes, my villain. So, actually, we've mentioned him already. I'm going to say James Cleverly. And again, it's a bit conventional. Yes, of course, oh God, what now? We don't like Conservative leadership candidates, and maybe not that surprising. But actually, I kind of thought Cleverly might have been interesting in some way. I think he's a thoughtful person. He's quite a smart politician. He's quite astute in some respects. And I envisaged him being the one who might actually weave quite an interesting position through the pack to try and sort of nudge the party towards a rational understanding of the predicament it was in, build something that wasn't just pandering to the comfort zone or talking absolute bilge. And he's just jabbering. He's just talking absolute nonsense. He's just as I said earlier, he's absolutely straight from central casting, first term in opposition, denialist, uninteresting. And I'm just plain disappointed, actually.
Yeah, we're not angry, James. We're just disappointed.
Exactly.
Zoe, who are your heroes and villains?
Okay, my hero, I'm afraid, is also a frontbencher, but it's going to be Angela Rayner for unapologetically enjoying her summer holiday, because the right-wing press loves to bully Angela Rayner, and there is such an overtly misogynistic and classist element to all of it. And the latest was a video of her dancing in Ibiza next to the DJ booth, and really dancing in the most politician dancing way. I mean, she was, it really was kind of mum
The
boobs.
Ray-Bop.
Yeah, but it was, I think it's really good to see a human side to politicians, which is something Angela Rayner does really, really well. But B, I love that she isn't cowed by the relentless attacks on her as a person, which I think are absolutely cloaked in a lot of prejudice. And I think really proudly, Labour politicians enjoying their holidays at a time where, the right-wing press are absolutely attacking them for trying to enhance workers' rights and, for God forbid, wanting to spend a Friday evening with your kids. I think good on her. So, I'm going for Anne.
I would agree. I mean, would they prefer it if her partying was just at a private members club where no one could see it?
Well, precisely. Yeah. Or, during lockdown. Yeah. And then my villain, I was going to, for balance, also do Keir Starmer's entire cabinet for forgetting to wish him happy birthday today. But I'm actually going to go for Esther McVey for her terrible tweet last week where she compared the proposed outdoor smoking ban to Nazi Germany. Yeah. By using Martin Niemöller's poem First They Came, which we all know, First They Came for the Communists and I Did Not Speak Out. She tweeted the first few lines of the poem and she said, pertinent words, R.E. Starmer's smoking ban, which is an extraordinary tweet.
Yeah, it's just that she then doubled down as well.
And then she refused to delete it.
Yeah. Tim, what about yourself? A hero and villain?
Well, I'm reassessing my choices because Esther's actually a neighbouring Conservative MP to me in Cheshire, and that was an absolutely outrageous tweet, actually. So I'll start off in reverse order. So villain is Ticketmaster, clearly. I spent hours yesterday trying to get Oasis tickets and discovering also the pleasures of Dynamic. Is it Dynamic Price?
Yes, yeah.
So they are definitely the villains of the piece.
Not Oasis themselves?
Not Oasis themselves. They can never be blamed.
Okay.
I still want to go, right?
No. That's another podcast in where we talk about whether the Gallaghers can be blamed for
anything. Of the week.
And then in terms of heroes, I mean, Bridget Phillipson did cross my mind because of that, monumental decision around Ofsted judgments. You can't underestimate the impact it's going to have. Teachers in particular get so stressed by the amount of focus and energy that goes into these single word judgments. And, it was such a tragic case that began this conversation properly. But instead, I'm going to go for, and this is going to be a little bit lame, I'm sure, I'm going to go for the first member of my team in Parliament, Fiona Wilson, because she, for me, is representative of all the new members of staff that MPs are hiring who are helping them actually help constituents. Because behind all the politics, in my inbox when I arrived the Monday after the election, there were people facing evictions, there were people facing issues around immigration, real life problems that people were having to contend with. And finally, having somebody to help you makes a massive difference. And behind the scenes in Parliament, there are hundreds of people who support MPs to do good on all sides in all parties. So a little bit lame, but I thought they needed a shout out.
Well, I'm going to go with Esther McVey as my villain because, it would be easy to call that tweet stupid, but it's far beyond that. It's just a ludicrous and horrible thing to write. And then actually, I'm going to go for Fiona Wilson because, you just sold me on it. It's almost like we've got a politician in the room too. You've heard Tim Roca throughout the show, but now it's time to really, really grill him. So imagine I'm not me, Tim. I'm Jeremy Paxman right now, but not quite really. You were a councillor then for nearly a decade. You were the deputy leader of Westminster City Council before becoming an MP. How have you found that transition from local government to where you are now?
So most of the time I spent in local government was in opposition. So I spent most of my time being frustrated at Conservatives doing stupid things. The most famous in Westminster, of course, was the spending of millions of pounds on the Marble Arch Mound, if you remember that. It was an attempt to draw tourism to the West End, but it ended up being a massive flop and a failure that people had to pick up the bill for. So being in opposition really, really sucks. That's obvious. Now, being a backbencher in government, I'm yet to see what it's like. So far, I'm enjoying it, and I hope I'll do a good job. But the key difference is we're in power. We can make a difference. I have to say there was this period in Westminster where I was the cabinet member for Children's Services and the deputy leader because we took Westminster unbelievably off the Conservatives in 2022, which I think was the beginning of Labour's progression, wasn't it, towards the victory in July 2024. And that was incredible because I had about 18 months actually responsible for services. And, we introduced free school meals before Sadiq rolled out across London from the ages of 3 to 14, with his help eventually. We increased support for youth clubs. Youth service has been decimated by the cuts to local government, so it's good to support, youth organisations again so they could provide for young people. School uniforms, that's obviously on the agenda for this government. So locally, what we were doing was helping with the costs of school uniforms for local families. So it felt really good. Now I'm going to be about Bencher. I think it's going to be much more about scrutiny, about supporting the government, also making sure that I'm holding it to account, even though I'm a supporter of it, so there won't be any free rides. And actually just getting stuck into the casework that will come into the office. So I've got a few priorities that I've been sketching out during the general election campaign that I want to put into practice. Macclesfield, if people don't know it, is a beautiful part of the country just south of Manchester on the edge of the Peak District. And it's got some of the lowest funded schools in the entire country. So the national funding formula really screws over places like Macclesfield. And we've got great schools, brilliant teachers. And I just want to make sure they get the money that they deserve to deliver the education they want to.
Yeah, well, a criticism of MPs can be that they're maybe too Westminster focused. And I'm sorry, Tim, you're probably going to get that a little bit more than most. What are your, now you're switching, where do you see your focus now? You mentioned about the scrutiny in Westminster, but in terms of your constituents and up there, balancing that, juggling that, what do you see your focus being on initially?
So it will be school funding. It's on the doorstep. Every MP, I think, during the election campaign will have come up with people who are incredibly frustrated with the neglect of local public services, their council being underfunded, the roads being a mess. We joke about potholes, but it did come up all the time on the campaign trail. So there'll be definitely something about advocating for local public services. But as I say, there's a very specific issue about education funding. Now, the more people I speak to, I understand it's going to be quite difficult and it's going to be a bit of a marathon trying to get movement on it. But as I say, it's a very important issue to people in Macclesfield in particular. On the other side, we want good quality jobs. We want people to have access to the services they need. So devolution is on the agenda in Macclesfield because Cheshire might be one of the places where the government decides to look for to create a combined authority. We've seen Manchester and Merseyside, Liverpool plough ahead with the powers that they've got. We feel a little bit left behind in Cheshire, so there's an opportunity there for more devolution, more powers, hopefully some more money as well. So I'll be wanting to push that agenda. And then the life sciences and pharmaceuticals are really important. So AstraZeneca, that famous company, has a big plant in Macclesfield. It employs lots of local people. So I want to make sure that I'm being supportive of that. And then the bread and butter is the casework. And you can't forget it because it's what people really elected you to sort out.
I'm really fascinated with the devolution point because, you've got this experience of local government, and now you're in Parliament, representing the sort of the Westminster perspective, and there is going to be a devolution bill. I think it's going to be called the Take Back Control Bill, although also that should be the Giving Away Control Bill, but whatever it's called. And there's always going to be a tension between wanting to get the benefits of devolution, decentralization, let people innovate, develop services, and ultimately the central government carrying the can if things go wrong and feeling the responsibility. And there's always going to be a tension between essentially the Treasury saying, well, we like the theory of giving away power and letting local government have a bit more control, but we can't possibly let go of any of the fiscal levers. Or if we let local authorities, if we take off the cap on council tax rises, that sort of thing, it's just going to blow back on us as central government. And so just your sense, having seen both sides of it, about how those tensions play out, I'd be really interested to get that view.
Yeah, just on the Westminster point. So for listeners, just in case they're not aware, so I was born and brought up in the Macclesfield area, and then naively came to London for work, and then I've headed back up and been privileged to be elected by my mum and other people in Macclesfield to represent them. But you're right, there is a tension with devolution, and of course in the UK we're one of the most centralised countries in the world, and you see different models of devolution play out across Europe, but traditionally in Europe, Spain's a really good example. The Treasury in Madrid still keeps hold of the money, for example. So you're right, there is that tension. We'll see what the details of the devolution bids, the details of those as they come out. Each one seems to be more tailored in each areas in terms of the powers that they're giving away, but the Treasury certainly is keeping the purse strings very close to it. And that will have to change over time. We want to decentralize funding as well. But you've got to be careful with the nations and regions in terms of doing that, because you don't want to end up in a situation where, for example, corporation tax, you could end up with a differential on one side of the border and the other and create competition that isn't healthy within the UK itself. So it has to be clever. We do have to take some money off the Treasury and make sure it's raised in other places, but let's not run away with ourselves.
I appreciate those those complexities, though. But I suppose a question I had for you that's maybe putting it in a slightly more simple way, though. What would Councillor you have been saying to MP you?
Well, I was lucky because I was a councillor in Westminster where we already have devolution in Greater London. You know, this is one of the tragedies for a large part of England is that Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, when it's functioning, and London already have a form of devolution and somebody flying the flag for them. But large parts of England don't. And so I would be saying, yeah, it's a good thing. It gives you the flexibility to focus on areas or develop local dynamic solutions that make more sense. And also, just on the basic level, people understand and the public understand that decisions are better if they're made closer to them rather than by a group of civil servants in Whitehall.
The language around levelling up and that sort of things had been changed. And I hate to make you just be complete representative of MP for the North right now.
Yeah.
But as a kind of MP for the North right now in this studio, what is your feeling around that project and changing and altering the way it is, and what sort of things are you specifically pushing for on that, maybe when it comes to the transport side of things and things like that? You mentioned obviously potholes and stuff like that, but I had the displeasure of getting a train down from Lincoln the other day from seeing my family, and that's obviously a problem. I'm sure coming back from Macclesfield to London is similarly problematic. So yeah, the levelling up side of things, where are you pushing there?
Yeah, well, it was. I was saying to Zoe before we came in here, it was standing room on the train because of a mess up with Avanti yesterday on the way from Macclesfield down to London. So transport is a really obvious example, and we know as well that if you invest in transport, it pays off in terms of the economy. But levelling up was such a beguiling term, and I think this is one of the inheritances that we've got as a government, is that we've got all these gimmicks and phrases that actually behind them lay a kernel of truth. Levelling up, is an aspiration that we all want for the country, but nothing ever came with it. Nothing concrete ever came with it. So what we're wanting from this government, and which I think we'll see the investment in the building blocks around infrastructure, around the green economy, because there's a great opportunity around the green economy to also drive forward the economy, the parts of the country that have not seen their economies grow in the way that you would want, and to get that investment in public services and particularly transport. And I think you've already got great spokespeople in the likes of Andy Burnham. Devolution gives you the chance to get more spokespeople to make those passionate cases for why it's not only beneficial for their areas, but it's beneficial for the whole country.
On this podcast, the massive focus on is Brexit. We were originally called Remainiacs, so the EU is a big part of our discussions here. In 2016, you supported Owen Smith's leadership bid, and he suggested there being a referendum on a Brexit deal of some sort there. At the time, you were then critical of the then leadership's stance on the issue of Brexit and on Europe. A few years have obviously passed since then. Do you think there is ever room for there to be that kind of direct involvement from the public on Brexit and their say on Brexit again, and in general, the feeling towards Europe there? How do you feel around that?
So this is the invitation for me to get into trouble, isn't it? Okay. So I'm passionately pro-European. I am European. My partner is Spanish. My dad was Spanish, so I think you'd expect me to be. Mm-hmm. But Macclesfield voted Remain. On the doorstep, Europe still came up quite often, actually, and more than people might think in this election. Interestingly, immigration didn't come up that often in Macclesfield. It's interesting, what the media thinks are the big issues of an election in certain parts of the country. I think where the public are at is that this is a debate that has been had and is on hold. And I think Keir Starmer was right to say that, the government would not be entertaining illusions of re-entering or making an application to rejoin the European Union during this Parliament. But we'd be working really hard to make sure that we had a close working arrangement with our European partners and allies. Me personally, as a Labour backbench MP, I don't know what other caveats I can put on it, would like us to be as close to Europe as possible. And in a future Parliament, I would hope the British public would have a say on what that might look like. So there will be people in the Labour Party, including myself, who'll fly the flag for pro-Europeanism. We'll carry on doing that. The conversation's not gone away. It'll still be there. But we understand the government's got its priorities to get stuck into now.
Well, with that, Tim, I suppose then as well, do you feel like there is maybe on that discussion, I'm obviously pushing you here to say how pro-European we want the Labour Party to be, and my thoughts on Brexit are probably relatively clear, but it actually has to start in terms of making Europe and the European Union feel differently towards us as well. It isn't simply about that. And is that what you would see your work in there being, in building those foundations for them to possibly ever think about wanting that relationship with us, not us just saying we want it?
Yeah, and I think we probably have to start moving away from thinking of Europe as this amorphous mass. The internal politics of the European Union, with the stuff going on with Hungary, with Italy, etc., is quite complicated in and of itself. And us getting into the European community in the 1960s was a psychodrama all of itself, if you look at the history books. But I think you're right to say that there needs to be a resetting of the relationship with Europe. And also, we need to be realistic about the legacy in international relations the Tories left us. People don't trust us. We're a country whose reputation is at a very low ebb after the shenanigans of the last 10 years. And I think Keir's made a really good start in terms of rebuilding those relationships with European colleagues, with the Biden administration, by sticking to a very firm commitment in terms of our support for Ukraine. But it's the beginning of a journey where, again, just like the public here in the UK on domestic policy, in terms of foreign policy, we're going to have to build credibility and trust with our partners and allies again after, being pretty awful.
On another foreign policy point, in July, you met with the Palestinian ambassador and separately with families of hostages taken by Hamas. Given developments, as Zoe mentioned at the start of the podcast, are you expecting to be involved in more meetings like this? And what's your general reaction to the situation there and your reaction in terms of practicalities, what you'd like to do around that?
Well, I'm just a backbench MP, but I've been really heartened by David Lammy and his ministerial team and the sort of language that they've been using about this. The situation can't be characterized as anything else than utterly tragic. But where we are at the moment is the level of civilian deaths is absolutely abhorrent, and we need a ceasefire as quickly as possible. And I think, commentators will have been thinking about why we're in the situation we're in. Zoe talked about it at the beginning. Why is the ceasefire proving as elusive as it seems to be? And I don't know enough about it, but certainly part of it has to be Netanyahu proving to be a roadblock to that, waiting on what happens in November in terms of the election for the White House to see if he can squeeze any advantage out of that. But as far as we as backbenchers, we have to be making the case that what is happening there needs to stop. Civilians are bearing the brunt on both sides, and we need to make sure that the humanitarian aid is finally reaching the civilians who need it. And then in the longer run, there needs to be a conversation that actually didn't really happen in British politics enough, in my view, in the previous decade, which is talking about what a just peace means, and also what Britain's role might be in a sensible way that understands our historic responsibility in the region as well.
Tim, I want to ask you a slightly personal question, if that's okay, which is, you've made a really good case for your constituency work, and obviously every MP first and foremost wants to be a constituency MP. But I wonder if you have any kind of vision of what sort of MP you'd like to be. I mean, do you want to be front bench? Would you want to be on a select committee? Would you want to be chairing a select committee? Do you want to be a campaigning MP? I mean, is there a reason you got into being an MP? Or are you kind of just happy to be here and see what will happen?
Sort of smiling as I enter Hogwarts. I mean, look, what certainly struck me in the first couple of months is it's a very strange role. There isn't a job description. And you're right, there are loads of avenues you can go down. We'll be drawing lots or whatever weird Hogwartian thing we're going to do for private members' bills shortly. There's lots of things you can do. I'd really like to be on a select committee and contribute to scrutiny in that direction. I hope, there's lots of egos knocking around in Parliament, but I hope I'm modest enough to understand that as a brand new MP, probably just understanding how it works and being effective representing my constituents before getting carried away thinking I'm going to be entering the cabinet in 6 months' time might be the best use of my time. So I think I'm just going to focus on the backbench stuff, represent Macclesfield, and hopefully be on a select committee and do some work there.
And what sort of select committee? I mean, is there a subject area that you're particularly interested in?
So I was the cabinet member for Children's Services in Westminster, so that sort of stuff does interest me. I'm interested in business as well and trade. I think we've got an excellent Secretary of State in Johnny Reynolds as well, and it'd be interesting to work on that select committee in terms of the agenda around that. But, happy to serve.
And that brings us to the end of Oh God, What Now? Thank you very much, Raf.
Thank you.
Thank you, Zoe.
Thank you.
And thank you, Tim Roca.
Thank you.
Oh God, Well Now will be back on Thursday for our backers and Friday morning for everyone else. Thank you for listening. See you next time.
A huge shout from me for your generosity to James Richardson, Sam the Broccoli Monster, and Luke Erickson.
And hello from me. You are quite literally our heroes. Robert Mills, Lee, Robin Mulvihill.
And finally, hello and thanks for having our back to Ryan West, Neil, and Phil Turner.